so ridiculously excited about today. I don't know if you can tell, because today is merging everything that I love about this world. It's going to be about emotional expression, emotional suppression, storytelling, the psychology of manipulation and propaganda, how our emotional bodies are being like slowly deteriorating and atrophying, how we are being very consciously disconnected from our sensations, our physicality, and how it's being normalized as this is just how life is and you just have to suck it up. And this is going to be the part that I'm posting publicly. So I can genuinely give hours and hours of this talk with an extensive analysis. And today I specifically decided that I'm not going to go into like film theory and I'm not going to bring any pop culture references, but I could, and I would love to point out that how throughout not just geopolitics, but throughout entertainment, this has been so seamlessly integrated into our psyche and so I want to say beautifully, because it's genuinely the mind child of incredibly intelligent beings who have a very high level of intellectual sophistication and a very disconnected emotional life. And that's going to be a pattern throughout the entire day today, that the reason why I'm not bringing in any outward examples is because I really want you to feel into your own examples in your own life, how you've been acting, how you've been treating others, how you have felt in relationships, not just in romantic relationships, in any kind of interaction. Because I'm not a fan of boxing and categorizing, because everybody is using their own terminologies and everybody is making up their own systems. And we're kind of sort of talking about the same thing. We're just really labeling it differently. So what I'm using right now, Keylontic science used to call it the victim-victimizer game, but they didn't flesh it out. It was just, I haven't found any proper explanation for it. I've only found one mention of it properly when it was broken down into the steps. And then after that, it was just said that, oh, we're going to have to look at this. And first of all, that was something like 15-ish years ago. So even back then, they were not really good at the internet culture. They were not really good at the modern view of what's happening with the psyche in terms of how not just social media, but artificial intelligence and how a very public life is affecting us and changing our view of ourselves and our relationship to ourselves and the world. You know, we've never been this interconnected. We've never had this much access to other cultures, other worldviews, other mindsets. And we've so gotten used to it that we think it's normal. 50 years ago, if you weren't well off to travel a lot, you could not access this many cultures, this many views, this many opposing views. You were kind of living in your own echo chamber, maybe for your entire life. Maybe you have never left the place where you were born. You literally die 20 meters away from where you were born. And it radically changed within the last few decades how we've been subjected to a global mindset, a global consciousness. And today I'm going to bring up a couple of examples of some very, very long-term thinking. There's the steps, they are broken down into 9 steps. And I'm using the original categorization of the victim-victimizer game from Keylontic science, but I've analyzed them and I've brought in different views from my own personal examples, my own personal experience of it, as well as like I've massively studied NLP, emotional manipulation, propaganda, because I'm fascinated with it. I'm a storyteller. Part of me wants to know why stories work and why we tell stories the way we are telling stories, why the entertainment industry is set up and structured the way it is. And then you realize why it is and you don't want to know it anymore. So what I can offer up today is that if you're interested in knowing more about this, let me know. Communicate, leave a comment, just, share your story or have a personal question or anything that you want to know more about, because I'm going to touch on a lot of things very fragmentally. And I would love to talk about this. It's like when I was watching this, I'm like, holy fuck, I have to watch Breaking Bad again. I fucking love that show. And I've done it 3 times by now, that when you watch it as a binge, you recognize subtleties in the entire arc. So instead of, that's what I'm bringing in today, that long-termism, that instead of just looking at these steps as completely individual steps, I'm also analyzing the arc itself, because you flip back and forth. It's very rare. Another show that's pretty good, hang on. Another show that's pretty good is called The Sinner on Netflix. I haven't seen it, I'm gonna watch it. So the steps, it's very rare that you're only living out one step for an extended period of time. And I'm going to use terms such as masculine and feminine, because we're talking about an externalized and an internalized way of dealing with the same level of complexity. And the only thing that changes from one step to another is literally the layer, the level of complexity. And they are building upon each other, but at the same time, you are not fixated on one of them. You can have a very linear transition from one to the next. And at the same time, you can flip back and forth even within one single fight. And some people do get stuck within, like, dating the same people with a different face, or just getting themselves into the same situation. Because I'm the fucking psycho that I am, I kind of been through all of them. And I've also decided that when I was writing a book in about emotional integration, I wanted to bring personal examples so that you don't feel like that I'm talking down to you, so that you don't feel like that I'm knowing fucking everything and nothing ever had affected me. I've been through all of these, and some of the steps are really personal to me, because when you admit to it that you've been more outwardly abusive, that's not an easy thing to justify for yourself. And you will see the escalation, that today's theme itself is emotional abuse. I still believe that we are ridiculously undereducated about what emotional abuse is. 100 years ago, wife beater was a term. And it was absolutely normal to have children as sexual partners, or have an outward infatuation with children in a sexual way. So I believe that as a culture, as a global consciousness, as society, we are at the infancy of understanding what abuse is or trauma is. We've just started to grasp what physical abuse is and what sexual abuse is. We are still having very heated discussions out in the public on what counts as sexual harassment or sexual abuse. And we'll see it towards the end of the sociopathic scale, why those conversations get very tricky. And I think we haven't even started to grasp what emotional abuse is, let alone financial abuse. Some people are not even aware of it, that that's happening. And that's one of the most hard-hitting ones, because probably apart from love and emotional connection, not for everyone, but for most of us, and food, finances are the trickiest area of life to deal with, and we are being heavily abused financially, but we're not even being aware of it, that this counts as abuse. Same thing with emotions. We're not even being aware that what we are tolerating or what we're doing to each other is actually really one-sided and really abusive. So the main distinction for today is cognitive dissonance. Big words. It's the eerie feeling between words and actions and physical bodily sensations. And we are not educated in our physical sensations, as well as we are living in a culture where it's hip to look like fucking apathetic models. Like, smoking is not hip any longer. Now it's vaping. Drinking is borderline hip. It's now we're using juice cleanses instead of drinking, but it's still the emotional detachment and the level of nonchalant carelessness and looking like you just don't give a fuck. That's still being marketed as something cool, sexy, and desirable. On top of all that, because we're not being educated on what emotions are and how they feel, we don't have a distinction. And emotions don't follow a linear logic, but they do have a relationship to each other that can be met. It's not necessarily a cause and effect relationship. They can come in bundles. Emotions, physical sensations can find you as this 1,000 pieces puzzle. It's like, there you go, you sort this shit out. And because we don't know where the pieces fit, we're just like, this is too much. I don't want to deal with it. I don't want to feel at all. Instead, if we were just been told that, well, this is how sadness, anger, frustration feels. This is how fear, I don't know, I'm like, I cannot even make out that many emotions, because discrimination was the first one, but I'm like, that's not an emotion. But if we don't even have terms for it, or if we don't even have the subtle distinctions for our emotional lives, it's very easy to just get overwhelmed with it. And you're like, I'm not cleaning this shit up. I'm just going to let it build. So today, especially when we get to the second half, it's going to be very important to be ridiculously honest with yourself and feel into the difference between words and actions and an intuitive bodily sensation on how to treat each other and how to treat yourself.